It's good to see each of you here. Johnny messed up my little speech. I was going to tell you that I needed your help, that I was at this outstanding department store today and had a new men's cologne on sale. And I was trying it out, and I wanted you to give me some input on it. If I should buy more of it or leave it alone. But now that you know it's a plumbing problem, I guess I can't get away with that one. That's the only bad part. Ann's got to live with me, so. All right, book of Ecclesiastes tonight. By way of the outline, we noted in the very outset as we studied through the Psalms that we were looking pretty much at the devotional life of the nation of Israel. When we studied through the Proverbs, we were looking at the practical side of things, everyday things that affect our life, affect our relationship with God, affect our relationship one with another. And as God's redeemed people today, we need to be aware of the responsibility that we have to worship God. And at the same time, we need to be aware of the responsibility that we have on a daily basis to live the Christian life. In 1 John 1:7, John says, if we walk in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. The blood of Jesus Christ, His Son, cleanseth us from all sin. And we note when we look at that verse occasionally that the word walketh is a continuous action word that suggests we must keep on walking. The word cleanseth is a continuous action word, which means if we will keep on walking, God will keep on cleansing. But if we cease to walk, then we need not expect God to cleanse us from our sins. And so the practical side, as we studied through the Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes, and that's where we are tonight, and I suppose and you could pick out any number of verses. I noted specifically chapter 6 and in verse 12, in which the writer says, for who knoweth what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? And just kind of summarizing the aspects of that, the emptiness of life without redemption. The emptiness of life without God. That's basically what is involved in this particular book. It deals with man's evaluation of life, at least from the perspective of the one who writes this book. And I'm convinced that since it is written was written by inspiration, that the message of the book would be just as applicable to anyone who attempts to live their life without God. You may recall in the Ephesian letter, and you might want to turn there momentarily in chapter 2, where Paul begins this chapter by talking about those who have been quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins. What does the word quicken mean? Make alive. And so those who were dead in trespasses and sins have been made alive. But in that past life, he describes that, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world. Notice that word walked. That was their way of life. That was their manner of life. They walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all had our conversation in time past in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. Then he talks about what God has done for us. Then you come down to verse 8, for by grace are you saved through faith. Verse 10, we're his workmanship. Now notice verse 12. That at that time, that is when they were dead in trespasses and sins, before they were quickened, before they were made alive, before God's love and mercy and grace was appropriated in their lives, that at that time ye were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. I doubt if there is a verse anywhere in the Bible that spells out in more concise terms the condition of one who is not in fellowship with God as that verse does. Without God, without Christ, without hope. How much more desperate could a situation be? You have a similar passage in, where is it? Revelation chapter 2, chapter 3, where Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Where is he? He's on the outside. If any man will hear my voice and open, I will come to him, he to me, and so forth. But being on the outside, being separated from God, being without hope, that's basically what is described in the writings of the Ecclesiastes. The emptiness of a life without God, without a relationship with God, the experience and reflection about life while out of fellowship with God. So you see frustrated man wandering from divine wisdom in search of happiness. And we'll get into the matter of that wisdom here in just a little bit as we develop this outline. So the central message, well, we noted in point C, comes from the wisest preacher among men, and those verses just talk about the wisdom that he had. The central message, emptiness of everything apart from God. That's what we just noted. The key word, I think, in this book would be the word vanity. And by way of definition, the idea is of foolish pride or emptiness. The word's used, at least in the King James, I think 37 times. And so his point in every case of things that he tries, what is his conclusion to each of these areas of life? All is vanity and vexation of spirit. There's no hope in any of that whatever is available to us in this life apart from God. Then a key phrase within the book would be under the sun, used some 28 times in the King James rendering of this book. And so we're dealing with things of this life. What does this life have to offer separate and apart from God? Now that ought to be a point of interest to a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who are attempting to live their lives, who are attempting to find happiness, who are attempting to find satisfaction, who are attempting to find fulfillment in the ways of this world. And according to the writer of this book, it's not going to happen. The true satisfaction and fulfillment comes out of that relationship with God. So we noted that 1 John 2:15-17 is perhaps a good commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes. What does 1 John 2:15-17 say to us? Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. The love of the world will bring what? It will bring us happiness. All that is in the world, what is it? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life. It's not of the Father, but is of the world. The world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God, the Father, abideth forever. Then in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19-21, and there are other passages that we'll look at more here in just a minute in that regard. So, if you wanted a brief outline of the book, we've tried to give that to you. The theme again, all is vanity. When you began reading the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor, which he taketh under the sun? So there's your key word, and there's your key phrase. Vanity under the sun. That's the context in which the things of this book are said. Then if you wanted to break it down beyond that, chapter 1 and verse 4 through chapter 12 and verse 12, seeking satisfaction in life. That is, the things of this life, the things of this world. And then we enumerated 7 different areas, the same ones pretty much that he uses in the book. For example, there are those who are seeking satisfaction in life through nature and science. That would be chapter 1:4 through chapter 12:12. In that particular section, chapter 1, verse 4 through verse 11 of chapter 1. Now, is there any value at all in nature and science? Oh yes, there's value in nature. There's value in science. For example, in Psalm 19, the psalmist said, the heavens do what? Declare the glory of God. And the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and so forth. On through that psalm. And so there are things that we can learn from nature. We can learn there is God from nature. Over in Romans chapter 1, you recall that as Paul begins this letter down in verse 18, beginning of Romans 1, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they're without excuse. But then he goes ahead to say, but that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God. And then the problem starts. But the point is that there are things that we can know about God through nature. But does that give us an adequate source of information by which to live this life and ultimately be with God when this life is over? No, because it doesn't tell us anything about His will for us in that regard. We wouldn't know what God wants us to do just looking at nature. But yet there are people who trust and put all of their confidence, their trust, their whatever into nature. I've even had people who say to me before, well, I can get closer to God out in the woods, in the forest, walking through the trees, than I can in a church building in a worship service. Well, if we are neglecting our worship to God to take that walk through the woods, you can't get closer to God being or not being where He told you to be. It won't work. Now, there are things about nature that can bring you close to God. But there's a time and a place for those things. But they're not going to tell you what the will of God is. We need to study His Word to know. And of course, science, true science, does nothing but confirm what the Bible has already told us in one way or another. And so there's a place for nature. There's a place for science. But in and of itself, without a relationship with God, would be inadequate. Then in chapter 1, verses 12 through 18, there are those who are seeking satisfaction in life through wisdom and philosophy. Well, what does the Bible tell us about wisdom? Well, first of all, it tells us that there are two different kinds of wisdom, doesn't it? James chapter 3, for example, James talks about beginning in verse 13 of chapter 3, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. So there's a wisdom that is of this earth. But the wisdom that is from above, so there's a second kind, is pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. Quite a contrast between the fruit of the wisdom of this world and the fruit of the wisdom from above. And so he gives you both sides of the coin in that regard. So when you look at the world in general, what kind of wisdom are most people relying on? Their own? The wisdom of the world, the wisdom of men, not the wisdom of God. Much of what we looked at last week in the Proverbs spoke to that problem as well. So there's this wisdom from above, and so James in James chapter 1 says what? If any lack wisdom, let him go to the library. Ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not. And so God has promised that wisdom. Well, wisdom and philosophy. In Colossians chapter 2 and in verse 8, Paul warned, let no man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit. And of course the philosophy that he's dealing with there again would be the same as the wisdom issue. It would be the philosophy or philosophies of this world. No doubt in the Colossian letter he had some specific things in mind, but it's true in general. The philosophies of men, the ideas of men, the doctrines of men. It's not what we need. And we can be deceived by those things. We can be spoiled in the sense that Paul uses the word in that regard. Then in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11 seems to suggest that there are people who are seeking satisfaction in life through pleasure. Now there are some exceptions within this section of what I'm about to say. But it seems, for the most part at least, that the pleasures under consideration in this context are not what we would refer to as sinful pleasures, but just the general pleasures of life. Just out having a good time. And like I said, there are two or three things in verses 1 through 11 that would have to be put in the category of sinful pleasure. But much of the other that he mentions in this, for example, look at what he says in verse 4 beginning. I made me great works, builded me houses, planted me vineyards, made me gardens and orchards, planted trees in them of all kinds. Sounds like he really loved to work outside, enjoyed the pleasures of the outside. You know people like that. They just don't want to be inside. You're not going to keep them inside. They want to be out working in the yard, in the garden, something of that. And they get a tremendous pleasure out of that. Then there are the other pleasures as well. Then he goes ahead and talks about, made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees, got me servants and maidservants and possessions, great and small cattle. All of those, there's nothing wrong with those things in and of themselves. But where are they going to be when this life is over? Or when your life is over? They're not going to be of any benefit to you. They're not going to bring eternal satisfaction. They may bring some pleasure to you for a while, but it's only temporary pleasure. It's not lasting pleasure. And yet, again, there are people even today who seek after those kinds of things. And they're not interested in God in addition to that. Then there are those, chapter 2, verses 12 through 16, those who seek satisfaction in life through materialism. You remember in Luke chapter 12, beginning with about verse 16, Jesus told about a man who was very successful as a farmer. What did he decide to do? Tear down his barns, build bigger barns, so he could bring in all of his harvest. Nothing would be wasted, and that way he'd just have more to share with everybody around him. No, that was not his intent. He was going to say to himself, take thine ease. Just sit back and take it easy. You've got everything you need for a long time to come. Without God, what's his circumstance? God said to him this night, thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall those things be? You remember the rich man, Luke chapter 16? What did he have in this life? Apparently everything he wanted, and then some probably. But where did it get him when this life was over? Because he didn't have God in addition to those things. There's nothing wrong with material wealth, with possessions, as long as God is, properly in the picture. But if we have all of those things without God, what is a man profiting? If he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul. So while it may bring some temporary satisfaction, in this life, what's it going to bring you when this life is over? Again, the same conclusion is what? All is vanity, vexation of spirit. Then chapter 3 through chapter 4, the idea of fatalism or self-centeredness, and when you begin to read through that, you'll recognize the section. There's a time to this, a time to that, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so some have gotten the idea from that. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, if it's your time to go, you're going to go, nothing you can do about it. It's not your time to go, you're not going to go. You don't need to worry about it. Then why in the world, when you come to a stop sign, do you stop? It's not your time to go, everything's going to be fine. If you believe that, I don't believe that. But the idea of self-centeredness comes out of that, and all of that discounts the providence of God. God's working, folks. And he gave us a little bit of something, to work with too. Some of us, most of us. So we need to use it. And to use good judgment, good sense. And not get the idea just going through life blindly with the idea, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. No, God can make changes in your life. That's why, personally, I like the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. It was the major message that Moses was putting out to that second generation of Israel was, if you go in the same direction that your fathers went, God can take what was intended for a blessing to you and make a curse out of it. But if you'll not follow in the steps of your fathers, but you'll follow in the steps of the Father in heaven, follow in the steps of God, then God can take anything that was designed as a curse in your life and make a blessing out of it. That's providence. What did Joseph's brothers do? What did they think they were doing? They thought they were getting rid of him because they were jealous. But what did they really do with him when God got through with everything? They sent him into Egypt to prepare for them to have food whenever the famine hit. Now that wasn't their intent. But God took what was intended for harm in his life, made a blessing out of it not only to him, but to his whole family. And so this idea of fatalism certainly is not within scriptural context. Then, chapter 5, there were those who try to find satisfaction through religion. Is that a good place to find satisfaction? Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, that's the bottom line of it all. That's the only place where there is true satisfaction if the religion through which you're trying to find satisfaction is true religion. Now, there are a lot of so-called religions. There's a lot of false religions floating around. But certainly, as you begin to read through there, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. Be not rash with thy mouth. Then he comes on down, when you vow a vow unto God, prefer not to pay it. Then he comes on down, verse 8, thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment, and justice in the province. Marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be a higher than they. So what's he doing? He's trying to get them to see there is God. And there is a way of life that is beneficial. And if that's where we're seeking satisfaction, then certainly we will find it there in true religion. Then chapter 5, verse 9 through chapter 6 and verse 12, there are those who try to find satisfaction in wealth. Again, it is only temporary. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, for godliness with contentment is great gain. What do people of this world consider great gain? Winning the lottery? Being successful in business? Being able to accumulate much of the material things of this world? But notice verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. And then he goes on to talk about riches in that regard. So wealth is not going to get the job done in that regard. Then through morality, certainly there's a place for morality. And he discusses that in chapter 7 through chapter 12. But again, morality alone is not going to save anybody. But God's redeemed will be a morally pure people. And then the concluding part, and one that we probably are maybe more familiar with than any other, and that is the spiritual admonition at the end of the book. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. After he's gone through this whole list of things in life whereby people try to find satisfaction. And the conclusion to all of it is, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Then here's the conclusion to all of that. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. And so that's the way it concludes. And that's interesting, and a lot of times we use this, and adequate or accurately so, chapter 12, with regard to young people. And that's how he begins this last section. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Because what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get older. You're going to get less responsive. You're going to pass from this life. If you haven't remembered God, where are you going to be? You're going to be lost. You're going to be lost. And so he tells us to remember God. He tells us when to remember God, now. And he tells us how to remember God. Good 3-point lesson in chapter 12. Remember God now, and here's how to do it. Fear God, keep His commandments. And so that's kind of a brief outline of what is in the book. Then we've noted in point 2 of your outline the vanities of Ecclesiastes, and much of that is, some of it at least, is what we've already talked about. Some of it is somewhat different, but he begins with human wisdom. We've already talked about that. You'll recall in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul said, for after then the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. Pleased God by the foolishness of preaching, to save them that believe. And then he goes on to talk about God and wisdom and men and so forth in the concluding part of that chapter. So human wisdom is vanity. Human labor, chapter 2, verses 19 through 21. We can work as hard as we want to work, and we can be as wise as men can be from an earthly standpoint. And yet what's going to happen to us? We're going to die just like everybody else, aren't we? Doesn't matter how hard you've worked or how wise you've become in the process. You're going to die just like everybody else. And then where's all that wisdom and labor going to get you? Now, I don't want to overlook the fact or leave the impression that we don't need to work. We know better than that. If a man won't work, neither shall he eat. But the idea here is trusting in our labors. But you'll recall as well in 1 Corinthians 15:58, the labor that's not in vain is what kind of labor? Labor that's in the Lord. Always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord, Ken.
I remember one of the guest speakers we had this winter made a statement that I haven't forgotten. He said, I've never seen a funeral procession where there's a U-Haul truck following the hearse.
That's right.
Taking all their earthly possessions with them.
Yeah, we're not going to do that, are we? And we just cannot do that. Then the vanity of human purposes. You see, if our purpose in life is different to or opposed to God's purpose for our lives, then that's vanity. It's not going to get us anywhere. Our purpose in life, according to 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 11, should be to God, to glorify God, that God in all things might be glorified. That's what our life is to be about. Then there's the matter of envy. In chapter 4 and in verse 4, again, I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Where's envy going to get you? It's going to get you out of a relationship with God, isn't it? It's not going to profit anything when this life is over. In Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 19, Paul mentions the works of the flesh: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envies, murders, drunkenness, such like. You know, we like to talk about those first sins and those last sins, but we don't hear much about those middle ones, do we? Wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. I mean, we kind of let those things slide. We won't let fornication and adultery slide. We won't let murder slide. Yeah, sometimes drunkenness can get through the cracks a little bit. But envy, we won't touch that one. Wrath, well, we won't touch that one. But God touched it. And He put it in the same list, same category as the others, of which He said, and they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Then there is the vanity of greed, chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. What happens when we get more? We want more, don't we? The more we get, the more we want. You don't find too many people who are satisfied. Yeah, that's right. Robert and I were doing a little work over at the house, and we got talking about some of these things. And one of the things that we talked about in that regard, you get more, you want more, and the idea of being satisfied, and who's satisfied with what they have. There's a song or two that we sing that I just really can't sing with a lot of enthusiasm. I'm satisfied with just a cottage below. How many people are satisfied with just a cottage below? Not many. And yet we sing that so wholeheartedly as, I'm not saying we don't need to sing that song. We need to think about where our priorities are. And then the other side of that same coin is, but I want to match him on the other side. Well, I tell you, I'd be just more satisfied with the cottage over there than I would a mansion here. I just want to get there. And so let's be careful how we, prioritize things in our lives in that regard. Then there's the vanity of fame. You can be known worldwide today, and you can be history tomorrow. That's what life and death is all about. It's not going to get you anywhere. Wealth, we've already talked about that. Covetousness, chapter 6 and verse 9. Wanting begets more wanting. Time wasted. Recognition. We can be honored by men. What did Jesus talk about in Matthew chapter 6? Who recalls right quick? Your alms deeds, your prayers. For what purpose? To be seen of men. Yeah, they do their alms deeds, and they go through all this, make sure everybody sees what they're doing, be seen of men. And He says, they have their reward. What is it? They're seen of men. That's what they're looking for. That's what they're going to get. Nothing more. So then in the conclusion, and we go back to a psalm, one of the psalms here, Psalm 90, and in verse 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. It's good advice, isn't it? When you look at all of this life has to offer, without God, all is vanity, vexation of spirit. Many of the things that He's talked about, nature, science, wisdom, philosophy, pleasure, material things, wealth, morality, all those things are fine. But without God, they're not going to get us anywhere as far as eternity is concerned. So Solomon saw earthly life at its best, yet his soul was never satisfied. The real turning point in the book, chapter 8, and in verse 12. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before Him. You think about that. You see people around you living in sin. Looks like everything is just going so well for them, and you're striving to live the Christian life, and looks like nothing's going well for you. that can get us sidetracked if we're not careful, can it? But just remember what he says. He said, "Yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God." So that's why it comes down to the conclusion then and says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Respect God and His will. Keep His commandments. That's what man's all about. That's what life's all about. Not about all of these other things that men give so much attention to. That's not what life is all about. It's about a relationship with God. And so as God's redeemed, let us make sure that our priorities are where they need to be with regard to all these things. Use the blessings of this life in a good way. Be good stewards of all of the blessings that we have materially. But don't put your trust and confidence in them, because they're not going to last. Maintain your relationship with God. That's what it's all about. Song of Solomon next week.
Have your attention for announcements this evening before our invitation is extended. If you're on our sick list, we'll start there. Robin Hanson, King Glover's daughter, is now at home, doing some better. Continue to remember Joan Thurman, Louise Morris, and of course the Blank family. Also, sympathy is expressed to the family of Polly Weaver. This is Betty Gray's aunt, who passed away today. Also, we express sympathy to the family of David Evans. This is Rosemary's son and Elizabeth Reed's father, who passed away yesterday morning. Memorial service has been postponed until a later date, and we will make an announcement in reference to that when we have the information. Also, food may be taken to Rosemary or Elizabeth's home. Just be sure to call before you go. Thank you to all who donated to the Rain Tree Village Children's Home. CIA will meet this Sunday at 4:30. This Saturday, March the 8th, the Oxford Church of Christ in Oxford, Alabama, will be having a Ladies' Day that will begin at 8:30 Central Standard Time. Please see bulletin board for more information. Also, this Sunday is the beginning of the gospel meeting at West Georgia Church of Christ and will continue through Thursday. It begins at 7 o'clock each evening. If you have registration forms for the mission trip, please turn in to Honey as soon as possible. Also, Saturday, Lads to Leaders will be meeting, specifically the puppets, those involved with puppets and those who would like to help, Saturday from 1 to 3. And lastly, don't forget to turn your clocks forward an hour this Saturday night.
There are a lot of great questions that are asked in the Bible, but one asked in the book of Job. The question was, if a man die, shall he live again? And of course, the Bible repeatedly addresses that issue. For example, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, there were those in the church at Thessalonica who were concerned about their loved ones who had already passed from this life. And Paul addressed that and talked about the resurrection. In Hebrews chapter 9, the Hebrews writer says it's appointed unto man once to die,